They told us we were free, while our land was still leased, our youth still jobless, and our dignity still imported. I speak today not from comfort, but from conviction. Because across this continent, the silence has become unbearable. We are told to clap for reforms that never come, to believe in leaders who no longer believe in us, to wait politely while foreign hands harvest what our ancestors died to defend. But I say, enough. The time for waiting has passed. The betrayal is no longer whispered, it is shouted from the shacks that grow in the shadow of skyscrapers. It is written in the hunger of the child whose mother votes with hope, but receives only slogans. I have not come to manage decline. I have come to end it. And so I ask you, across Africa, from the townships of Soweto to the red dust of Ouagadougou, what does it mean to lead when your people are bleeding? Do not look away. What comes next may change how we read the map. Subscribe and keep watching. I did not come to govern the status quo. I came to confront it. Because when the house is burning, you do not rearrange the furniture, you sound the alarm. That is what I did, not in a press release, but in a speech that tore through the diplomatic silence surrounding Africa's so-called progress. I named names. I spoke truths that too many whisper but dare not shout. I said, the African National Congress, the mighty ANC that once stood unshakable against apartheid, has become a caretaker of inequality. That President Cyril Ramaphosa, hailed as a man of business and balance, governs with caution while the people collapse under the weight of broken promises. I did not speak to insult. I spoke to awaken. Because what do we see in South Africa today? A party once rooted in revolution, now tangled in boardroom deals and global investor conferences. A government that sings the songs of struggle while protecting the same economic structures that strangled its people. A president who speaks of unity but governs through appeasement, not action. Ramaphosa, I said, had the chance to ignite Mandela's dream with Sankara's courage, but instead, he chose the comfort of consensus. That is not leadership. That is survivalism wrapped in diplomacy. I spoke of youth, those who rise early to search for work that does not exist. Of mothers who vote in hope and weep in silence. Of communities where shacks multiply like grief in the shadows of shining malls. I spoke of a nation that once lit the flame of freedom, now smothered by its own fear of change. And I spoke of Burkina Faso, not to boast, but to remind that we chose a harder path not for glory, but for life, because waiting was killing us. And when a people must beg for the fruits of their own soil, they are not free. That is why I used the words I did. Not charity, not pity, sovereignty. I knew the consequences. I knew the headlines would come. Traoré attacks Ramaphosa. Burkina Faso insults South Africa. But I also knew that silence was no longer an option. Because the revolution is not nostalgia, it is necessity. Liberation is not a museum, it is a movement. And the ANC that once inspired the continent cannot be immune to criticism simply because it once bled for justice. Some call my words harsh. I call them honest. Because if we do not speak the truth among ourselves, the world will continue to define us through lies. And the most dangerous lie is that African leaders are free while their economies remain captured, their people remain hungry, and their futures remain borrowed. I asked, where is the fire that once burned in the hearts of Soweto's youth? Where is the commitment to land reform that does more than fill speeches and folders? Where is the courage to confront capital, not with anger, but with conviction? I said, this is not about reckless rebellion. It is about radical responsibility. And I asked Africa to choose, not between war and peace, but between submission and sovereignty, between waiting and walking forward. I reminded us all that we do not need permission to rise. We need only the will to stand. And I know this message is uncomfortable because it forces reflection. It forces leaders to ask, when did we begin to fear the people we once swore to serve? When did comfort become our God? When did the boardroom replace the village square? And so I say again, with no apology, the time for polite management is over. The time for bold truth has come. Not bravery, not bluster, but bold truth. But is fearless truth enough to break centuries of control? They said I went too far. But tell me, how far is too far when your people sleep hungry and wake hopeless? I said, the youth have been betrayed. And I meant it. Because across the continent, and especially in South Africa, the betrayal is not theoretical. It is visible in the crumbling school walls of Khayelitsha, in the endless queues outside job centers in Johannesburg, in the silence that greets a university degree with no opportunity. It is the betrayal of a generation told to dream, but given no tools to build. Told they are the future, yet locked out of the present. They carry CVs like crosses, knocking on doors that never open. They are praised in speeches, but policed in the streets. Their anger is criminalized, their desperation ignored, their dignity rationed, and still they rise. They rose in protest. They occupied campuses. They marched through townships. They demanded what every democracy owes its children, not luxury but fairness, not favor but opportunity. I named this betrayal because no one else would. I described a leadership class more interested in investor confidence than in the confidence of a hungry mother walking kilometers for water. Leaders who sign extraction deals in suits while their people dig with bare hands. Who govern for ratings abroad while their youth rot at home. And yes, the reaction came. Some clutched their pearls in Pretoria. Editorials warned of reckless rhetoric. Diplomats whispered of tensions between states, but no one dared deny the truth. Because they knew this was not just about South Africa. It was about a continental sickness. The betrayal of the poor is not isolated. It is systemic. It is what happens when politics forgets its purpose. And the people feel it, not just in policies, but in their bones. Across the continent, I heard from young people who said, at last, someone is speaking what we live. In Burkina Faso, in Nigeria, in Zimbabwe, they echoed the same cry. We are not waiting anymore. Even some within South Africa reached out, not out of offense, but out of recognition. You did not lie, they said. You simply said what we wish our leaders would remember, and I do not take joy in that. Because I do not wish to be right, I wish to be wrong. I wish the children of Soweto were not still fighting for education. I wish the promises made in 1994 had been fulfilled. I wish the youth of this continent could dream freely without having to cross oceans or borders. But wishing is not enough. So when I said the ANC has become more interested in managing inequality than eradicating it, I was not making a slogan. I was naming a fact. And facts do not change because they are uncomfortable. When a movement becomes an institution, and that institution becomes a barrier to justice, it must be challenged. With respect, yes, but with courage too. Because the streets are speaking, and the silence from power is no longer acceptable. We are not calling for chaos. We are calling for courage. We are not asking for war. We are asking for the will to act. We are not tearing down the past. We are demanding a future, and that demand is growing. From dusty roads to digital networks, the youth are organizing, not around parties, but around purpose. Not waiting for manifestos, but building movements. And when they act, it will not be out of hatred, it will be out of necessity. Because if leaders will not serve, the people will lead. As the youth rise, who truly stands with them? When a government loses its people, it does not fall in flames. It fades in silence. Trust is not always broken with violence. It is eroded by delay, by indifference, by betrayal dressed as patience. That is what we are witnessing. Across Africa, and especially in South Africa, there is a quiet rupture between those who govern and those who are governed. The streets do not trust the speeches. The youth do not believe the promises. The poor no longer expect change. They expect to be blamed for wanting it. The consequences are not abstract. They are felt in the body, in the home, in the soul. A father who no longer bothers to vote because the queue costs him a day's wage. A mother who skips medicine so her child can eat. A student who drops out, not for lack of talent, but because transport is unaffordable. These are not exceptions, they are the rule. When institutions protect themselves before they protect the people, democracy becomes theater. When policy is written by consultants who never leave the suburbs, governance becomes a masquerade. And when inequality is managed instead of dismantled, injustice becomes permanent. That is what happens when the people are reduced to statistics. That is what happens when the grassroots are ignored. But let me say this, the people have not disappeared, they have adapted. They have organized themselves without waiting for permission. They have built what the state refuses to fund. In townships, communities feed one another. In villages, farmers trade seed without subsidy. In the slums, youth form study groups in the dark. This is not charity. This is not survival. This is resistance. And from this resistance comes a different model of leadership, not from above, but from among. Not declared on podiums, but proven in practice. I have seen it in my own country. Burkina Faso is no paradise. We are not a miracle. We are not immune to struggle, but we chose to stop waiting. We chose to act even when the world said it was too risky. And yes, the world noticed. Suddenly there was Ibrahim Traoré news flooding the headlines as if the story were about one man. But it was never about me. It was about the refusal of a people to be governed by foreign interests and domestic neglect. It was about courage, not chaos. Correction, not collapse. And that spirit lives far beyond our borders. It lives in every African who still believes that sovereignty is not a slogan, but a right. That dignity is not granted by development reports, but earned through struggle. It is time we ask, why must we tolerate broken schools while mining deals are signed in gold? Why must we debate food prices in parliaments filled with catered meals? Why must the poor clap for policies that bury them deeper? This is not governance. It is betrayal institutionalized. And yet, something is shifting. Communities are no longer waiting for elections. They are building alternatives. They are creating savings clubs, farming collectives, digital education platforms, security patrols, mutual aid networks. They are doing what the state should have done because they understand that real power starts from the ground. And this is what terrifies the elite. Not riots, not slogans, but organization. Because once the people organize, they do not ask. They act. They do not demand change, they become it. Leadership must be rebuilt from below, not as charity, but as principle. Not as crisis response, but as a new contract. The era of vertical power must end, and in its place must rise a new politics, participatory, principled, unafraid. We must rewire the relationship between citizen and state so that authority is earned, not inherited, so that ministers answer to mothers, not to multinationals, so that policy begins where the pain is deepest, and that begins with truth. The truth that the current system serves the few. The truth that those in suits have grown comfortable managing decline. The truth that without a new foundation, Africa will remain rich in words and poor in justice. But here's what gives me hope. The ground is fertile. The people are ready. The harvest will come, not through reform, but through renewal. Through the courage to rebuild, not with blueprints from abroad, but with wisdom rooted in the land. If one landlocked nation dares, what stops the rest? The moment a leader in Africa speaks with defiance, the world listens, but not with curiosity, with concern. Concern for stability, concern for investment, concern for the comfort of those who have always benefited from our obedience. When we declare that Africa must act in her own interest, suddenly the language shifts. Words like radical, unpredictable, populist fill the reports. And behind those words is the same message. Know your place. Do not disturb the order. Do not question the terms you never helped write. And when we do disturb that order, the backlash is not always loud, it is precise. Sanctions, suspensions, statements of concern, and sometimes silence when blood is spilled. That is why I say, diplomacy without dignity is theater. If our sovereignty is only respected when we obey, then we are not sovereign, we are supervised. Across the continent, we have seen this pattern repeat. In Mali, Niger, Burkina Faso, we chose to walk a different path, and the international response was not dialogue, but punishment. Institutions that speak of partnership moved quickly to isolate. Neighbors who once praised our struggle chose distance over solidarity, and yet we endured. Not because we are immune to pressure, but because we know that freedom without discomfort is an illusion. We were not looking to be liked. We were looking to be free, and that freedom comes at a cost. It always has. Whether through economic isolation or attempts to destabilize, the message is clear. Boldness will be punished. And still, we press on, because the alternative is to live on our knees. I do not say this lightly. Burkina Faso has been targeted militarily, economically, politically, and, most recently, even through whispers of violence. The words tentative d'assassinat Ibrahim Traoré appeared not in fiction, but in murmurs that cannot be ignored. And yet I remain. Not because I seek martyrdom, but because I refuse to govern in fear. If our truth threatens the comfort of those abroad, so be it. But let it be clear, no nation owns our voice. We will not measure our progress in the applause of Paris. We will not shape our policies to earn praise in Brussels. We will not define our dignity by whether Washington approves. We will shape our path in Ouagadougou, in Bamako, in Niamey. And we will speak not just for ourselves, but for every African who has watched their leaders fold under pressure that was never meant to serve them. Because this continent does not need permission to speak. It needs only the courage to say what must be said and the strength to act when others tremble. Can a continent reclaim its voice without breaking the script? The road ahead is not easy, but it is ours. And that in itself is revolutionary. For too long, Africa's path has been charted in foreign capitals, mapped by consultants, financed with strings, and paved with compromises. Now we stand at a turning point, not between left and right, but between dependence and dignity. We must choose whether to continue managing the decline or to embrace the discomfort of transformation. And let us be clear, radical change is not a threat, it is a necessity. It is not about burning institutions, but about rebuilding them from the roots. It is not chaos, it is correction. A correction of the economic models that treat our labor as cheap, our land as collateral, our people as statistics. A correction of the false pragmatism that tells us to wait, to obey, to endure. Because we have waited. We have endured. And what has it brought us? Crumbling schools, stolen minerals, imported food on fertile soil, leaders who look outward for praise, while their people look inward for strength. No more. The time for heroes has passed. This is not about a single leader, a single party, or a single nation. This is about a collective awakening, the kind of awakening that cannot be televised, cannot be sponsored, and cannot be suppressed. It begins in whispers, in small acts of defiance, in communities that refuse to disappear. And then it spreads through village meetings, union halls, student forums, farmer cooperatives, until it becomes unstoppable. That is how movements are born. That is how futures are written. We must reimagine development, not as GDP charts, but as the daily dignity of the people, not as the comfort of the elite, but as the empowerment of the majority. We must center agriculture, education, healthcare, not as sectors, but as lifelines. We must protect our natural wealth, not with slogans, but with policy. We must demand transparency, not as a favor, but as a right. And we must defend sovereignty, not just in speeches, but in every budget, every treaty, every law. Sovereignty means the right to say no. It means the courage to chart a course that may not be popular, but is necessary. It means accepting that those who benefit from our weakness will never applaud our strength. But we do not need their applause. We need each other. This future will not be built by presidents in palaces. It will be built by calloused hands, stubborn hearts, and clear eyes. It will be built by those who organize, who educate, who plant, who protect, who refuse to be bought. And yes, there will be storms. There will be setbacks. But storms do not frighten those who know they are standing for truth. They remind us that change is not coming, it is already here. The storm is rising. Will we shape it or be swept away? The road ahead is not easy, but it is ours. And that in itself is revolutionary. For too long, Africa's path has been charted in foreign capitals, mapped by consultants, financed with strings, and paved with compromises. Now we stand at a turning point, not between left and right, but between dependence and dignity. We must choose whether to continue managing the decline or to embrace the discomfort of transformation. And let us be clear, radical change is not a threat, it is a necessity. It is not about burning institutions, but about rebuilding them from the roots. It is not chaos, it is correction. A correction of the economic models that treat our labor as cheap, our land as collateral, our people as statistics. A correction of the false pragmatism that tells us to wait, to obey, to endure. Because we have waited, we have endured. And what has it brought us? Crumbling schools, stolen minerals, imported food on fertile soil, leaders who look outward for praise, while their people look inward for strength. No more. The time for heroes has passed. This is not about a single leader, a single party, or a single nation. This is about a collective awakening, the kind of awakening that cannot be televised, cannot be sponsored, and cannot be suppressed. It begins in whispers, in small acts of defiance, in communities that refuse to disappear, and then it spreads through village meetings, union halls, student forums, farmer cooperatives, until it becomes unstoppable. That is how movements are born. That is how futures are written. We must reimagine development not as GDP charts, but as the daily dignity of the people, not as the comfort of the elite, but as the empowerment of the majority. We must center agriculture, education, healthcare, not as sectors, but as lifelines. We must protect our natural wealth, not with slogans, but with policy. We must demand transparency, not as a favor, but as a right. And we must defend sovereignty, not just in speeches, but in every budget, every treaty, every law. Sovereignty means the right to say no. It means the courage to chart a course that may not be popular, but is necessary. It means accepting that those who benefit from our weakness will never applaud our strength. But we do not need their applause. We need each other. This future will not be built by presidents in palaces. It will be built by calloused hands, stubborn hearts, and clear eyes. It will be built by those who organize, who educate, who plant, who protect, who refuse to be bought. And yes, there will be storms. There will be setbacks. But storms do not frighten those who know they are standing for truth. They remind us that change is not coming, it is already here. The storm is rising. Will we shape it or be swept away? Africa is not waiting anymore. We are not waiting for approval, not waiting for aid, not waiting for permission to breathe with dignity. The time of polite decline is over. The time of managed poverty is over. What stands before us now is not a dream, it is a choice between silence and sovereignty, between fear and freedom, between continuing a path designed by others or daring to walk our own. And I say, we must walk, even if the terrain is rough, even if the applause does not come, even if the storms rise, because what is at stake is not comfort, it is the future. This is the lesson from Burkina Faso. A landlocked country, yes. A small population, yes. But a voice that refused to echo the script. A people who said, we will defend our soil even if we stand alone. And the world noticed. Headlines flooded with Ibrahim Traoré news. But what they missed was the movement underneath. The movement of farmers reclaiming their land, of students rewriting their education, of women organizing cooperatives, of soldiers choosing dignity over dependency. This is not the story of one man. It is the story of many who refuse to kneel. And yes, the threats are real. The pressures are mounting. There are whispers. There are rumors. There are risks. The phrase tentative d'assassinat Ibrahim Traoré did not emerge from fiction. It reflects a reality we must face, that truth-telling in Africa can be fatal. But we speak anyway. We build anyway. We rise anyway. Because what we fear more than bullets is betrayal. Betrayal of those who died, believing in a continent that could be whole, proud, and free. So let us return to the soil, not just as land, but as memory. Let us honor the calloused hands that fed us, the broken backs that built our cities, the quiet defiance that carried us through colonial chains. Let us rise not just in resistance, but in construction, in vision, in unity. From Dakar to Addis, from Goma to Gaborone, from the youth who read Ibrahim Traoré, news not as gossip but as guidance, we must know this: there is no cavalry coming. There is only us. And that is enough. If this resonates with your sense of justice, do not leave. Subscribe and walk with us.